57talk.com. Gary Cubetta back with you again from Scottsdale, Arizona, and it's my pleasure to introduce one of the all-time legends in the world of professional wrestling from Smyrna, Delaware, the great J.J. Dillon. J.J., pleasure to have you with us.
Gary, it's my pleasure, and if there's anybody listening from Delaware, it's Smyrna, not Smyrna, or they'll know that you're definitely from out of town.
Okay, I'm sorry. Not ready to go. J.J., what year did you get into professional wrestling?
Oh, I want to say I started following wrestling somewhere around 1957. I was about 15 years old, born and raised in Trenton, New Jersey, and discovered wrestling looking around the limited number of channels that were available in those days compared to today. And there was one wrestling program that was telecast live for like an hour and a half every Thursday night from the Capitol Arena in Washington, D.C. with Ray Morgan. And someone told me the other day there are some old tapes out of some of those telecasts. An old timer named Jimmy Lake was the ring announcer, and it was the era of Argentina Rocca, Carl Von Hess, Chief Big Heart, Dr. Jerry Graham, Buddy Rogers in those early days. So that's what caught my attention. And for a young kid in New Jersey who liked baseball, by comparison, there wasn't anything exciting as wrestling. And I just decided, some kids want to be cowboys or join the circus, and I decided wrestling where I wanted to go, and that was my lifelong dream.
And how'd you break into the business?
In the beginning, I was just hanging around and wanting to attend the matches. I went to my first live event at the Armory in Trenton and saw Argentina Rocca and Carl Von Hess. I would then travel to some of the arenas that were, within close proximity, and you could actually go to Philadelphia in those days by train, and it was safe to walk the streets to go to events. So I kind of hung around and sold programs in the arena, not really to make money, but so I could get in without buying a ticket, and just hung around, and next thing you know, it was take the ring jackets back from the corner. And when I was in college, 1962, they were doing a live tape television show at the NBC studio on Walnut Street, Philadelphia, and I would come down with a guy from Reading, and it was maybe a 45-minute drive, and he would set the ring up, which in a very small studio in the basement. He would put a T-shirt on, I'd put one on, he'd have one corner, I'd have the other, and my college buddies would see me on TV Saturday and thought that was a big deal. And one week they had a blizzard, and none of the commission referees showed up, and there were enough wrestlers there to do the show, and they needed a referee, and everybody just kind of focused on me and said, "Could you referee?" I said, "Oh, absolutely." So that was my initial 60 minutes of fame, and I must have done a good job because they asked if they could get me on the commission there in Pennsylvania, and then later on New Jersey, and I refereed from about 62 to 68 until I met the Sheik, came in for a series of matches with Bruno Sammartino, and that opened the door to my eventually getting a chance to actually go in the ring first time as a wrestler.
Now, there's a video out there of one of your early matches in Detroit, wrestling for the Sheik.
Yeah, that would be one of the very, very early matches. My first match was against the same Hells Angels in a small studio in Akron, Ohio, where Ernie Roth, Abdul Farouk, and had a career of his own and was well known. But he was the commentator at the desk for that very first match. But it wasn't Arnold Skolin, it's somebody else. But then I think one of the matches up in Michigan, again against the Hells Angel, and that particular occasion Arnold Skolin was my partner, and that one is the one that's available on tape. And you could tell that I'm young and inexperienced. You can always tell by a young guy because he's always fiddling with his tights, trying to, just nervous reaction to what's going on. But that would be one of my very, very early matches.
JJ, you worked with, some of the biggest promotions, Crockett, WWF, now WWE for many years. What were some of the strengths and weaknesses, looking back at it, of the Detroit promotion in the early 1970s?
Well, at that point, there were probably 25 regional promotions around the country, and the promoters from each of the little, what they were called territories, kind of had their own little fiefdom, and most of them produced their own television show, and you didn't have widespread exposure in those days. In other words, like in Florida, the program that they recorded and telecast for their own territory was pretty much just seen within the state of Florida. So if you lived in Florida, Dusty Rhodes and Eddie Graham, Jack Briscoe later on, I mean, this is what wrestling was. And in Detroit, it was the Sheik and Bobo Brazil and Wild Bull Curry, and it was a great time in the business because because there were so many places where a guy could go and work full time, and you didn't fly in those days. It was a limited geographic area, and Detroit was to me one of the exciting places, and it will always hold a special place for me because the original Sheik, a lot of people said, well, he didn't pay very well, or he didn't do this, or he didn't do that, but I learned early on to judge people based on my own experiences, and here was a guy that gave me an opportunity when nobody else talked about it, and I was paid for every appearance that I ever made, and he was somebody who said he would give me an opportunity and good words. So the Sheik will always hold a special place in my heart, as will the Detroit territory.
And what is it that you'd say about the territory at the time? Because it was red hot. The strong points, was it the Sheik himself? Was it the way the cities were coordinated? Was it the TV package? Was it the talent base?
I would say, Gary, it's probably a combination of all of those things. And certainly in the history of the business, the Sheik was one of the all-time great villain. He certainly wasn't imposing physically. He wasn't a huge man, but he was somebody who just would look at you and he would scatter a crowd and strike fear into him. And it was at a time when Bobo Brazil was red hot. The Mighty Igor, Tex McKenzie was there, and really a lot of the great wrestlers of that era funneled through there. And I think they had kind of a working agreement with the Toronto territory. So Lord Layton's there regularly. Luis Martinez. As I talk about it, more and more names come back to me. George the Animal Steel started there because he lived in that area and taught school, and he'd appear under a mask. Original identity, I think, was called the Student.
Yeah, so the Student.
It was called the Student.
Right.
And it was a great place, and I think it was probably a combination of a lot of things, including talent, and the Sheik himself had a lot.
Did you ever get an opportunity to see the Sheik's original? Supposedly had this giant mansion in outside Detroit. Did you ever get an opportunity to see it?
No, when you would call, he would talk to you on the phone. He was accessible, but I never did get up to. I guess he did. It would be called a mansion, and he had a lot of extended family members that lived there, and I heard people talk about what a magnificent place it was, but I personally never did get up there. Around the time I started, my mother and father actually lived in Royal Oak, Michigan, which was a suburb of Detroit. My father spent most of his life and retired with General Motors, and started in Trenton at a plant, and then towards the end of his career moved to Detroit. So when I went out there, I had a place to stay in the Detroit area, and I think the Sheik was from up around Lansing, and his place, and I never did get up there.
They had a promoter at Cobo Hall, Francis Leisure.
Yes, and I believe that was Sheik's wife's father, Joyce Farhat, and I think Francis Leisure was actually her father, if memory serves well.
Was he involved with the promotion, or was it just a name they used rather than using, hey, the Sheik's got a card this Friday night at Cobo?
Yeah, I think it was more of just a name that was used.
And how many years did you wrestle up in Detroit?
Actually, when I first called him up, it was just a weekend that I went out there, and I had a job that time, was living in eastern Pennsylvania, and had an extended vacation, long weekend, and like I said, my parents lived out there, so I went out, actually booked in Ohio for the first night, and then I didn't have a booking Saturday, and then they did their TV tapings on Sunday, I think up in Walled Lake, if I remember right, up north Detroit. And once I got there Friday, somebody had said, well, there's some guys that go and work TV in Pittsburgh on Saturday, which was a promotion. Bruno Sammartino had an interest in a guy named, an old-timer named Ace Freeman, had something to do with it, and an old promoter named Rudy Miller. And so they said, well, we could have used an extra guy. I don't know what the situation was. I said, well, I'm here for the weekend. If I can hook up with you guys and have a ride, I would love to. And so I did, and went to Pittsburgh for the Saturday, which again was another TV taping. And actually that was my first of what I call sanctioned singles match on TV against Killer Kowalski. So that's something else very, very special. When I was beginning to referee, I used to go down to a gym in Philadelphia. Just, they didn't have a ring as such. It was just mats on the floor, and there was a young Puerto Rican kid there from New Jersey that used to come there, and was a hopeful too. In 1962, he befriended a promoter of the Vineland Speedway in South Jersey, and they were bringing in what was then a WWF event outdoors at the speedway that this guy owned. And he told this Puerto Rican boy, he said, I'd like to add you as an extra match on the card if you have somebody that you can wrestle. And that somebody he could wrestle was me when he talked to me in the gym. And that was actually my first real professional match, because I think I got paid $50 or something. And then they came back and had another card a month later, and we had a return match again as an add-on card. We weren't really booked by a booking office. So I guess I have to say that in 1962 I became professional, but I look at the matches in 1968 with Sheik really when I was booked by a sanctioned promoter as the beginning of my career. And after that 3-day weekend, it wasn't until the following year that I took a whole week off, called the Sheik again, and again, good to his word, yeah, come on out. And that week, it wasn't just, TV job matches, but he booked me for the whole week in regular arena events. And it was at a time when Killer Carl Cox was there, who was hot, Mark Lewin, again, Bobo Brazil was always there, Wild Bull Curry, and I wrestled a couple times that week against a guy named Pedro Godoy, who's an old veteran, and I talk about it in my book a lot, because as a guy who's working what I call enhancement matches on TV, you don't get much offense, and you're pretty much in there taking a beating, and it's a different environment when you go to a live arena show and you're in a match. It's a different pace, it's different everything, and instead of a couple minutes, you're now looking at 10, 12, 14 minutes sometimes, and so it has to become a match. And I remember the first night, Pedro Godoy, he wanted me to slam him, and I'd actually never slammed a guy before. I understood the mechanics of it, and I picked him up, and he was an average sized guy for a wrestler, probably 230, 40 in there, but I got him up and kind of was not sure of myself, and almost dropped him on his shoulder, and I remember back as if it was yesterday that my God, this man's gonna kill me when he gets back up. And we went through everything was fine, and the match ended, and I'm thinking, well, I guess this is going to become a confrontation in the dressing room. And when I got back there, we had access to each other, and he said, hey kid, come here, and he said, pick me up. And we're on the floor in the dressing room, and he showed me how to get deep under him so that I had more balance and control of his body. And he said, pick me up, and had me get him in a position where I had him balanced and had control of his body, put me back down on the floor, do it again, and then I actually wrestled him like a couple more times that week. And I remember the next time, the very first move was slam me kid, picked him up, slammed him, and it was perfect. And, but that's how it was in those days. If you had passion for the business, you had respect for the business, the old timers recognized that, and they didn't resent you. They didn't see you as a threat to take their position, and somebody helped them, and they helped you, and that was always my philosophy later on my career, is to also be someone who, as much as I could, get back to business.
So what type of span do you think you were in Detroit? 4 years, 5 years?
Actually, after I wrestled that week, I came back, and I was still working for a trucking company in Eastern Pennsylvania, and it wasn't what I wanted to do career-wise, and I thought, well, the trucking, and at the end of like a trainee program, they would send you out to one of their terminals, like for an extended assignment. So I thought, this is great. I'm going to tell them I want to go to Detroit, and knowing that the Sheik had the promotion there, get out and then make a transition to becoming a full-time wrestler. Sure enough, they transferred me to Detroit. I had a place to stay with my parents, and I remember calling the Sheik, and he was very honest with me. He said, and this would have been the early part of 97, late 69, early 70, and he said, look, my business just so right now. I have some guys here who I'm already committed to wrestling full time. That's how they feed their family. And he said, I would love to help you, but he said, your situation's unique. That you have a job and have an income, and I want I would encourage you to keep your job. I'll give you what bookings I can, and then we'll wait and see how my business does and talk about the future. So I was there probably 4 or 5 months. I'd work, sometimes once a week, sometimes twice a week. Did get some more experience under my belt, and finally, because it's so heavily unionized, Detroit, the terminal out there, the management training program said, well, we can't leave you in Detroit because you can't be productive there because basically it's unionized and you can't touch anything because your management not part of the union. We're going to have to transfer you somewhere else. We're going to send you to Niles, Ohio, and Niles, Ohio is to the far east in Ohio, about right near Youngstown, probably 90 miles from Pittsburgh. But now I'm at the far end of the Sheik's territory where I couldn't hook up for rides. I mean, I was very despondent at that point, thinking, wow, here I moved to Detroit thinking this was going to be the beginning of my career, and it hasn't worked out like I wanted. I did get some experience, and so I reached out to Bruno Sammartino. I had gotten to know quite well from my 8 years as a referee, and eventually approached Bruno after writing to him at an event in Pittsburgh, and told him I had some experience but wanted more, and felt that I had the ability, that I would not be an embarrassment on his card. I would do a good job, and so he booked and started me that very next week, and they only ran like 3 days a week. I think it was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and I was told that I would be booked at least two out of every 3 days every weekend. So I stayed all of 1970, I guess, around Pittsburgh, getting good experience on the weekend, and they had some great local wrestlers that also had jobs, lived in the Pittsburgh area, and then maybe every 6 weeks or so, I would call the Sheik and say I'd like to come on out to Detroit, visit with my parents, and I would know when they had a big show coming up, like at Cobo Hall or Joe Louis Arena, and I tried to coordinate it with that, and supposedly Bruno Sammartino and the Sheik weren't on the best of terms for why I don't know, but and I could tell Bruno, is it possible for that particular weekend to have me work Thursday, Friday, because I can then drive to Detroit and pick up a major show and a decent payday on Saturday to their team come back. So I did that for a year, and enhanced my experience. And I met a guy named Jim Grabmeyer who was from Springfield, Ohio, and he wrestled in the Pittsburgh area, Ohio, eastern central Ohio, in the winter months, and had for years. And then in the summer, Crockett, which would be Jim Crockett Sr., had a reputation of being more predominantly a summer territory. They would run outdoor shows and what have you, and he was going down to Charlotte for the summer months, said, why don't you let me take some of your publicity pictures down, and you never know. So he left and went down there, and I got a call in a couple of weeks, and he said, the timing is right now, they're short and need some guys, and I showed him your picture and spoke of you, and if this is what you want to do, this is your chance. So I had to make a decision and packed everything in the car that I owned, and I at that point had never been south of Virginia in my life, and drove to Charlotte, North Carolina on a weekend, and had my first match on a Monday night in the Park Center against Gene Anderson, and I was not a kid, months from my 29th birthday, when I finally realized my dream and became a full-time professional wrestler.
Wow. JJ, were you a student of the game early on? Did you watch the other matches from the dressing room?
Oh, absolutely. I truly was a student of the game, because I think you could learn a tremendous amount by watching, and even throughout my career, I tried to do as much of that as I could, and in the circumstances, some arenas, you didn't have a vantage point where you could always do that, but my philosophy was, let me watch what the other matches are doing, get a sense of what this crowd is into, because every crowd, every night, and every arena is a little bit different. Even if you come back to the same arena on a weekly basis, it's funny how the mood in a particular crowd in a particular week change. And I wanted to watch, and if somebody was working a headlock or a leg hold or an arm hold, I didn't want to go out and duplicate the same thing that a match before me or earlier card had done. So I did watch, and beyond that, I think you'd never learn too much by watching other matches as part of the overall education.
JJ, contrast a show for me, let's say in Cobo Hall with the Sheik, a red-hot show, and a show with Bruno in Pittsburgh. Were they similar, or were they very different?
I think they were different in, I remember one match in particular that I saw in Cobo Hall. It was on the card that night. Dr. Jerry Graham was there, Moose Cholak, just dropping names, but Hans Schmidt. And the main event on that particular night was Tex McKenzie against say, Wild Bull Curry. And Tex McKenzie was somebody who really over with the people, but and you hear the same thing said a lot about Hulk Hogan. Was technically maybe not the greatest performer in the world, but there was something about him that the fans loved to see in the ring, and Tex McKenzie was certainly in that category in that era. He was tall and in many ways clumsy. But anyway, I'm watching from the back now. This is the main event, and Wild Bull Curry goes to the ring first, and he used to hold his ear and grunt and yell at people, and excuse me, he's stomping and just, snorting, looking back towards the dressing room, pacing in the ring like, can't wait till Tex McKenzie gets out here, and I'm just going to rip into him. Well, as the spotlight hit, this guy walks out, and he used to wear like a long trench coat, wore a big cowboy hat that he pulled down over his face. So this tall guy walks out, the crowd erupts. He's got his head down, and he kind of waving one side or the other, and Bull Curry's in the ring, come on, motioning, come on, get in here, I want to tear into. Well, as you're watching this whole thing, you see a guy almost like a cartoon situation tiptoeing up aisle from opposite the entrance where Tex McKenzie was to come. And, of course, he didn't have the hat on, didn't have the coat on, and so right away obvious that it was Tex McKenzie. He's almost like whispering to the people, don't give me away that I'm coming. He gets right to ringside, picks up a folding chair, quietly slides it under the bottom rope, crawls into the ring, picks the chair up, and all of a sudden, the intensity built. Of course, the other guy is getting closer and closer to the ring, so what finally happened is Bull Curry turns around and clunk, just gets clobbered over the head with this chair. The bell rings, Tex McKenzie covers him 1-3, and it's over. Well, most other territories, most other promotion arena, did something like that, it would kill the town, but this crowd erupted, and of course, probably a lot of it had to do with Sheik Bobo Brazil, also a card earlier, but a match like that you would never see Pittsburgh, Santino, WWF style promotion. And they did a lot of walk and talk, not a lot of classic wrestling, which I saw more and more of in South. And it was the heyday of people like Ivan Koloff and George the Animal Steel, Baron Sakuna, just with a different era. But the real contrast that I saw with change style from predominantly in the North Territory, and Pittsburgh was really kind of an extension of the territory that I'd been accustomed to, all the major towns in the Northeast where Bruno Sammartino was like a god. And when I went to the South, wrestlers, many of whom I had never heard of, Paul Jones, Nelson Royal, top guy was working in the office was George Becker, Johnny Weaver was his partner. Great wrestlers, don't get me wrong, but not wrestlers who were everyday common name in the history as I had known it up to that point. And also it seemed that you didn't have the guys in the Northeast Territory, whether Bruno Sammartino, Baron Gorilla Months, were much bigger physically and bigger than life characters. A lot of the guys that wrestle in the South are not physical and a lot more what I would call style wrestling. So it was quite an adjustment for me, but I loved it much.
I remember in the early to mid 70s, the Carolinas had a lot of buildings with fans stuffed right in, almost right up to ringside. And were they usually sellouts when you first went down?
A lot of them were, and that was the other contrast too. You didn't have the huge venues that you did in the Northeast, and the other adjustment for me was that a lot of the regular towns were regular weekly promotions, which you didn't see that in the Northeast. Madison Square Garden, even back in those days, I think was maybe every third week. The big centers like Pittsburgh would be once a month, Boston once a month, Philadelphia once a month, and here I'm going into the Carolinas where Charlotte's like every Monday night. Raleigh was every Wednesday night. And then they did have a lot of sporadic shows, did not run on a weekly basis, but Norfolk, Richmond, Raleigh, Charlotte, even Asheville and Greenville, South Carolina were town.
At the time, was it a little bit of a culture shock from the East, and now you're down South, different people, different food, different atmosphere?
Yeah, it was in many ways. I don't know, culture. Yeah, it probably was culture shock because, like I said, I'd never been below Richmond before, so now I'm in I guess what you'd have to call the Deep South, and I came there not too many years after integration, and I, there was still the hint of signs, that were maybe old signs on the top of the restroom or in drinking fountains, whites only, and being a kid from Trenton, New Jersey, where like 30% of the kids that I went to school with as I was growing up were there was a diversity. They were black kids, and so I didn't, to me that was just how I grew up. And now I'm in the South, where obviously wasn't that way very far back before I got there. And in fact, even in the Park Center in Charlotte, though there was integration at the time, the black fans who came every week and were loyal to wrestling, even though they could then sit wherever they wanted, kind of tended to sit in that one section where they had sat most of those years. In other words, it wasn't a huge change for them. I mean, you would see, smattering here and there, but basically the blacks all sat in one section. Not because they had to, but that's where they were accustomed to sitting. And again, smaller arenas, and when they did run, like the old Charlotte Coliseum, which was, I don't know, probably seated 6,000, 7,000 people, that was a big deal for a big show like Thanksgiving, Christmas, that kind of thing.
When you go into a new territory, for example, Crockett Senior's territory, and at this time in your young career, even though you're not that young age-wise, are you nervous trying to get to know the guys? Or in the wrestling business, was it friendly in the locker room for someone new, or was it like getting a new job? You go in and you don't know anybody and you're scared to death.
I wasn't scared to death because and this is not sound overly confident, but I did have confidence in my ability, and because I wasn't a young kid, it wasn't about drinking every night, chasing girls, being on television and thinking that was a huge deal. Though all those things are part of the excitement, but I was probably a little bit more serious than maybe some of the other guys, and because again I had a positive attitude, because I did have a genuine love for business, because I was like a sponge and I wanted to learn, and was respected in the dressing room, and the old timers pick up on that immediately, and so I had so much help there, and I stayed there 2.5 years, and it was an incredible experience, and I was welcome. And like I say, that first night, nobody knew me other than getting a positive nod from Jim Grobmeyer, who took my pictures there. But other than that, nobody knew me, didn't know what to expect, and sometimes the reality is it doesn't live up to the expectations. So wrestling Gene Anderson, he was perfect for me, and if I remember right, as I relayed in my autobiography, the match was only supposed to go like 7-8 minutes because they didn't know what I could do or what my performance would be like. And I remember that Gene Anderson gave me a significant part of the match, and we ended up out there like 14-15 minutes, and it ended up really to my benefit, because it gave and it was right there in Charlotte where Jim Crockett seemed to be there in the audience every Monday night. So it was a great place to start, and it was a chance for me to basically show what I was capable of doing. And somebody came over from the separate dressing rooms at opposite end of the building, and I don't know if it was the referee or what, came back and kind of shared with me that Gene Anderson had nothing positive things to say about me. So I really got started off good foot, and I loved it there, did well, and it was a perfect fit for me.
Tell me a little bit about the Anderson brothers at this point in their career, because you'll hear Ole even today talk about how much tougher the guys were then and how long the matches were and how over he was in the Carolinas. I imagine that's all true, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And when I got there, Ole wasn't there. Ole had been there before I arrived for a run with Lars and Gene too. And actually, Gene Anderson was really the only Anderson, real Anderson. The rest were tag team brothers for the purposes of making a team with the same name. And like I say, Gene was there, and Ole came in at some point after I was there, had come back, and so I was around Ole from the very early part of my career, and he never really changed that much over the years. He was outspoken, kind of cocky, and told you what he thought, kept to himself. He was frugal with his money, drove an old car, and was proud of it, and physically, he didn't hurt you, but he was physical in the ring, which a lot of guys were from that era. You hear the phrase, or you may have heard the phrase, working snug. And working snug means that you knew you were in there with somebody, but at the same time, you weren't having to be defensive or cautious for fear of being hurt. And did you get your bell rung sometimes? Absolutely. But again, I think that served me well, as being able to work with people like Gene Anderson, Ole Anderson when he came in there, Art Nelson, who was great to me, was in the territory at that time. And Art was, again, kind of like Ole, another guy that very much kept to himself, rode by himself a lot of times. And for some reason, Art took a liking to me, and we wore the same size boot. The first pair of boots that I had were made by a guy up in Hamilton, and Art wore a beautiful pair of boots that were made by a guy that may still makes today, a guy named Clifford McHias in Houston. And Art would get his boots resold, and ended up, I couldn't even pay for him. He gave me a couple times during the 2.5 years I was there an old pair of boots, and he encouraged. I hated working out. I didn't like to go to the gym, and Art would encourage me. He had they were like hard rubber straps, and he'd do like chest pulls in the dressing room at night before his match, and encouraged me, come on, knowing that I didn't go to the gym to try and help me look as good as I could. Art was somebody very special to me right from the beginning, and again, I think for the same reason, I gained Ole's respect. I knew what he was about. He was the same and never changed, and I consider Ole a very, very good friend even to this day, because I understand Ole, and I've worked for Ole in Atlanta where he was a booker, and Gene came in there with him, and Ole is he's remembered more for some of the things that he said when he tells it like it is, but to me, a Hall of Famer. I mean, you look at what he accomplished in his career, and the guy always worked on top and drew money wherever he went, and he was a major player in our business throughout his entire career.
So, JJ, you're there in the Carolinas, the early 70s. Ole comes into the territory. He's in a main event. You're maybe sneaking a peek out of the locker room. Is he just, this is kind of silly, but he's not going through the motions. What's his interaction with the fans, and what makes him so special from a psychology point of view in the ring?
Well, everything that he did as a single or with Gene was very logical, and he told a story. And I've heard Ole do interviews, where he was raised in Minneapolis. I think his father owned a bar, and Ole was a legitimate tough guy. And he would say, let's get it on. We can either do it here or do it out in the back alley. It doesn't matter to me. The outcome is going to be the same because Ole could back it up. And he and Gene were a great team. One of the greatest tag teams of all time, because they told a story. And I've heard an assessment of their matches where they would try to take one guy and get an advantage over him, and then the logic was like a chair. They would take an arm or take a leg, and just like a table with four legs, if you take one of the centers of balance, which is one of the four legs, and break it down, eventually the table is going to collapse. And that's what they did to embody. They would take an arm or a leg, and they would physically work on you. They would tag in and out, and what they were so good at was keeping you their half of the ring, so that you, as you're getting beat down, you were constantly fighting to try and get to the other side of the ring to whoever your partner was, to get, hopefully get a tag and to get some relief and have a chance to cover. And it would become a fight. They would make fight for that tag, and anybody sitting in the audience, that was the picture that was being painted, and done so very effectively.
Was this more psychology than you had seen in Pittsburgh or in Detroit? Was it utilized more down south?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And again, you were coming back weekly town, and that makes a big difference too.
After working in areas that had monthly shows, were you surprised that people would come week after week after week, or would you?
I in the beginning didn't really understand the significance of it, but wrestling fans were creatures of habit. Some of the greatest fans and most loyal fans in the world, and it's like anything else. Gave them a product that they enjoyed. Whatever that night, Monday night was wrestling night in Charlotte. People would arrange their schedule. I can't do this Monday. That's my night for wrestling. And the thing was that the challenge to you as a performer was to that loyal fan base is to make sure that the level of your performance was such that they were encouraged to continue to come back week after week, and eventually, hopefully, something that you did either in the live event or on television or a combination of both, kind of like word of mouth endorsement would grow the crowd. People would say they had a great time, and that was part of the motivating factor for you to try and increase the audience, because the more people there, the more money.
Did you feel like down south with a weekly territory that there was more chance to move from the opening matches up, really put on a good performance?
Oh, absolutely, because I started, and actually when I was in Pittsburgh for that year, I was basically a heel persona as an underneath wrestler. And when I got to Charlotte, I remember the first night, I was told, look, I hope this isn't a problem, but we're low, we're short some guys, but we need some help on the babyface side. Is that a problem? Hey, absolutely not. So I worked as a underneath babyface in Charlotte when I started full time, and again, it was an incredible learning experience. I got a couple breaks. A lot of success in the wrestling business was being the right place at the right time, and at that point, Dory Funk Jr. was the reigning world heavyweight champion during the period of time that I was there. And when he would come into the territory, the two top guys were George Becker and Johnny Weaver that were tag partners. Johnny was the younger of the two, and more outgoing, more athletic. George Becker kind of was the end of his career and was more maintaining his status based on his reputation. And so when the world champion came in, the focus was on the top guy to challenge him, and the fans hoped to take the title was, of course, Johnny Weaver. And Rip Hawk and Sweet Hansen were there. Playboy Gary Hart, Thunderbolt Patterson, who I had met in Detroit when I first started, came in. Jerry Briscoe worked the territory regularly. I mean, they had some phenomenal talent. And the world champion would come in for like a week period for a period of a week at a time, and would go around the territory, and they would have major shows and usually draw better. Because Norfolk and Richmond were regular weekly towns and were actually only about 90 miles apart, so there was a crossover in terms of the television exposure, and each of the towns drew their own audience, but there were some fans that actually went to both. And so it was awkward when they had the champion and would have him on Thursday in Norfolk and a Friday in Richmond. It created a dilemma if they didn't have a second major challenger aside from Johnny Weaver to wrestle the world champion. And Johnny Weaver came up to me and said, the world champion's coming in a couple months. Said, I have an idea. When he comes in, we have him in Norfolk and Richmond. Richmond was the really hot town, or Weaver was hotter in that particular town. I don't remember what. So he said, I'm going to work Funk Richmond. But he said, in Norfolk, we have him that night and want him on the card. Rip Hawk and Sweet Hansen with Thunderbolt Patterson, Jerry Briscoe was a hot tag match. A lot of tag wrestling was very big in that territory, too. And they were a match that was drawing money. So they said, well, Dory's there that night. We want to give him a credible opponent. It can't be Weaver because he's in Richmond. So he said, I have an idea. I'd like to put you with a world champion that night. And he said, what we'll do is we'll kill two birds with one stone. A couple weeks before, when Dory was in for a shortened run, they were going to have him work TV in Raleigh on Wednesday nights. And normally the world champion, when he came in, didn't work the local television. He didn't need to be overworked, and usually his reputation was made when he came in. But every now and then, if they could get a world champion on their local television show, that would help ratings. So they said, we would like to put you with Dory Funk as a television match and go out there and have the best match you can with him, and world champion will go over, which is certainly no embarrassment for anyone. And he said, I want to put you on a follow-up interview that next week after, and have you basically go on and say, well, that was my first time ever in the ring with a world heavyweight champion, and I didn't expect butterflies. I was, really had psyched myself out, and once I got in the ring, the bell rang, and found out, that, hey, here's a guy that, yes, he is a world champion, but, he puts his pants on one leg at a time, the same as I do, and I learned a lot in that 10 minutes, even though I lost the match, and if I could ever get that world champion, Dory Funk, back in the ring, especially in a 2 out of 3 fall match, I have absolutely nothing to lose, and all I've done is build my confidence with the first time around, and I'm an unknown commodity that how is Dory Funk going to prepare for me in a 2 out of 3 fall match? He doesn't know me, and so that was the foundation of putting me in a live event in Norfolk. Rip Hawk, it was like a double main event, and really Rip Hawk and Sweet Hansen with Thunderbolt and Briscoe was probably the match that sold most of the tickets, but I was there on that same card in a world championship match with Dory Funk. So to answer your question, yes, if you work hard, it is possible to get noticed and good things happen, and even in the confines of that particular territory in the almost 2.5 years I was there, I moved up the card. And later they teamed me with one of the old Kentuckians, Big Boy Brown, who with Grizzly Smith, they had been huge money drawers throughout the South, classic matches against I guess it was Bolos, they had gone round and round with. And so Big Boy Brown came in, and they had good success down there taking a big guy, putting him with a smaller wrestler, and you kind of went in the ring and did most of the selling and then gave the hot tag to the big guy. And so they teamed me up with Big Boy Brown, and I had a nice run, and we would get some main events in town.
When you had that match with Dory, 2 out of 3 falls, did you lose both falls?
You know, I don't remember. What I do remember about that particular match was this was on a Thursday night in Norfolk, and that Monday night I was in a tag match in Greenville, South Carolina, and I don't remember who my partner was against the Anderson brothers. And Ole had a thing where he would sling you around when he slammed you and hold you up in the air. And on that particular night, and I don't know, it was one of those freak things that happened. Ole picked me high up in the air and then kind of like almost did it for me, where he was having a hard time holding my weight, where he was losing his balance, and all of a sudden falls back with me coming down on top of him for like 1, 2.5, where I almost pulled off a surprise win over him. But he had me up so high, and I wasn't expecting it to happen. That as I'm coming down, I'm much higher than I would be otherwise, and as I'm coming down, all my weight's coming down as he's falling back, and I'm about to land on his face. And so at the last second, I kind of used my feet and my hands extended to kind of keep from squashing his face and pulling off. But what I did was severely sprained my one ankle, and it blew up. It was horrible. It immediately, it took a while to get some ice to get on it, but it swelled up really, really bad. And the next night, we were in Raleigh, and I remember I was in another tag match, and Les Thatcher was kind of my regular partner, that particular opponent at that particular time. And I remember it was so bad the next night that I actually couldn't get in the ring. That Les Thatcher went in there and basically worked the whole match with me without me ever getting physically in the ring, and I had to hold his shoulder with my one arm just to get to the ring without it being very obvious that I was injured. And of course, in my mind, I'm thinking, here's my chance of a lifetime on Thursday to wrestle a world championship match with Dory Funk, and look at me, I'm crippled. And so got through the match Tuesday, and I don't know what happened Wednesday, similar situation. So when I got to there Thursday, somebody taped it up, and so I basically went in the ring with Dory Funk in an opportunity of my life, severely injured. And Dory Funk, what I do remember, worked around my injury and had a very respectable match, and basically took care of me. But that was typical of how the business was at that time. You had to work hard to get paid, and guys took care of each other. So that's what I remember most about that night, my first chance world champion match. I was badly injured, and Dory Funk, being the great champ that he was, still somehow made a match out of it. People didn't know they were basically somebody was pretty well crippled.
Was there any sympathy from the promoters if you were injured, or would just get back in the ring, or we won't be able to use you again?
No. The pressure was, if anything, self-inflicted. In other words, it's like, hey, don't tell me I can't work tonight. I'll be there. I'll figure it out. Whether if it was a single match and couldn't, whether it was all of a sudden you got tacked behind and the match was over quickly or something. I mean, you did what you had to do to adjust the situation, but I can't say that there was ever pressure on the part of the promoter. We expect you to go in the ring, and if it was a long-term thing, that was just the nature of the business. If you couldn't perform, then they would get somebody else that would. And there was guys who always looking for an opportunity. That's how careers were made.
JJ, when someone like a Dory Funk would come into the locker room for the first time after touring, maybe he's been gone from Mid-Atlantic for a few months. What did he get a special reaction, or was he just one of the guys from everybody in the locker room? Oh, there's the world champion! Wow.
There was obviously definitely a respect factor there, but the world champions that I was always around were guys who were world champions for a reason, because they had great ability, they drew money, and the secret of a successful world champion was somebody who would come into the territory, draw a house, and leave the town in better shape than it was before they got there. And by that I mean, if Dory Funk came in and wrestled Johnny Weaver, though Johnny Weaver couldn't live up to the expectations of the fans and win the match and take the championship belt, the fans would leave saying that Dory Funk is the luckiest guy in the world. He just got away by the skin of his teeth, and if Weaver gets him back next time, he'll beat him. I know he will. That was a great world champion. It made the people that he worked with, and gave the appearance that they looked like that they could be beat on any given night. So a guy had to have tremendous ability to be able to go from territory to territory, come in, draw money, and lead. They want him coming in, drawing money, and killing the towns. Where next week the house drops in half. And then, what have you accomplished? And so the great world champion, had the ability to deliver and also take care of the towns and take care of the talent they worked.
Would someone like Dory work as a heel, or would he work neutral?
In most cases, they were a heel. And there were some cases where they would come in and, which were kind of on the rare side, where they would come in and their challenger would be a heel where, the fans didn't want them to get beat. But, in most cases, the fans wanted to see a change in title holders. So it was, I don't know, percentage-wise, probably at least 90% or greater of the time, it was a top babyface that challenged the champion, and the fans came in the hopes that they would see a new champion and their local hero would be the new title holder.
So what led you to leave the South, Mid-Atlantic?
I went there. Because I moved up the card, I made more money the second year than I did the first year. I got a chance to wrestle Dory Funk, and I remember, the world champion had to be careful too, because they would get a lot of heat on them if they came into a territory, because Funks had a territory of their own in Amarillo, and they wouldn't want the reputation where they would come in and steal talent in the territory where they came in to defend the title. But Dory Funk told me it was in a positive way, and said, "Hey, look, whenever you're done here and the times, you feel the time's right and you want to move on, I'm hoping that you'll come to Amarillo and work for us, and that if you did, we would give you a top spot. We come in." And so that was a very nice thing for the world champion to basically indirectly recruit you and tell you when you're ready to move on, I hope you'll give me a call first, and we would love to have you, and we will take good care of you. It's good on a bunch of levels. I mean, it's good for your confidence. Say, hey, I've made it in business. Here's the world champion wants me to come work for him in his territory. So that happened, and again, as I mentioned, being the right place, the right time. There was another promotion up in the Maritimes of Canada, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, that just ran during the summer months in hockey arenas when they didn't have ice down, and those were the arenas that they used. And they opened up basically after hockey season ended, and then in the fall, right as they were ready to put down the ice, their season was over. So it was like maybe close to a 5-month season. And the brothers, it was a team of brothers that lived up there that were the top local stars. The one brother was the promoter and had a business partner that together they got the TV up there. And 3 of the brothers worked in the ring. The Beast was the top babyface. He was a rugged guy that had been a world traveler. And then Leo Burke, another brother, was the classic wrestler, very much in the mold of like a Pat O'Connor or somebody like that. He was one of the greatest wrestlers that I ever faced in my career. And then there was one other younger brother. And during the off season when they were shut down, that one particular year, Leo Burke, the second brother, and Bobby Kay, the third brother, would come down to the Carolinas for the summer months. And for the winter months when they were playing hockey up in their home territory. So I got to know them, and they had a relationship with Johnny Weaver because he worked in the office. So when their summer season opened, Johnny Weaver went up there usually twice during the season. He might come in for a week and got really treated well, and it gave him a break to get out of the Carolinas for a week and to travel. And then he was due to come in like at the close of the season, and they would have like a big kind of a blow-off week. And as it worked out, I'd been there, I guess, a year and a half, a little bit longer, close to 2 years. And it was the end of their season up in the Maritimes, and Weaver was due to come back for that closing week. And somebody in the Charlotte territory got hurt, and one of the major guys, and Weaver wasn't booked because he was scheduled to go to the Maritimes, so he kind of had an obligation to stay in the Carolinas and be the substitute for the guy that got hurt, and it left a void up in Canada in the Maritimes. So it was a last-minute thing. He said to me, I can't go. I've got to stay here, and he knew a week or so ahead of time, and he said, I'd like to send you up there. It'd be a good experience for you, and I know what you'll do. You'll go up there and do a fabulous job. And I remember telling him, I said, geez, Johnny, how am I going to get there? Well, you fly up there. Well, I don't have money for a plane ticket. So I'll talk to Mr. Crockett, and that was Jim Sr. And he said, you come into the office, and of course, Johnny had already talked to Jim Sr. And actually, I'd been there probably a year and a half. It wasn't even quite 2 years. And I remember going into the office, and he was the typical Southern gentleman, and sit behind his desk, and he was a big guy, kind of rotund, and everybody was Mr. Crockett, very highly respected. And I remember saying, Johnny would like me to go up there in his place because he'd stay here, but I don't have the ticket. And Jim Crockett, well, how much is the ticket? And we already knew that it was $600. So he comes in his pocket and peeled out $600 on the desk and slid it over to me. I want you to go buy the ticket. And he said, they'll reimburse you when you come back and see me. So that's what happened. I went up there for the week. I was in a tag situation with a guy named Freddie Sweetan, who lived up there as well, and he would have a fresh partner each year, which gave his team a new look, and he was an integral part of the success of that promotion up there. So I went around that last week as his partner, and I guess I made Leo already knew, was familiar with me, so they accepted me as the replacement for Weaver that week, and I went up there, and I guess and he'd only seen me as a babyface, so now I'm up there a heel again, but I'd worked heel the first year in the business, so I went up there, and I guess I, again, took advantage of the situation, right place, the right time, and really worked my tail off, and they were really happy with my performance that week to the point that they said, well, when we open up next season, we'd like for you to come back for the summer and be Freddie's tag partner for the whole season next year. So again, I'm thinking, this is really great. I'm flattered, great for my confidence, and I remember going back and going into the office and reimbursing Jim Crockett Sr., and I said, Mr. Crockett, I said, which was unheard of, they give 2 or 3 weeks notice at most. I said, I'd like to give you the 9-month notice that next spring I want to leave and go up to, they've invited me to come up to the Maritimes, and it's a break for me, and I'd like to go. And I remember Mr. Crockett saying, well, I'm happy for you, and he said, you stay here, and, we'll take care of you here till the time to go up there, and he said, I want you to go, but at the same time, I want you to know that you always have a home here.
Wow.
So I went up and went forward with the idea in mind that the following season, I was going to go up there for the summer and then see what happened after that. And getting back on the right place, the right time thing again. Every year they had a single heel that they featured, and then Freddie Sweetan would have a fresh partner, and that was really the nucleus that they could, have a 5-month run without anything getting stale. And the Mongolian Stomper had been up there one season. Actually, the season before I came up, Killer Carl Krupp had been their top heel for the year. And they'd always had big, rugged guys because the Beast, who was the top babyface, was, a rugged, burly guy, too. And they're very, people work in the woods up there and fishermen, and they're a hardy people. And so that was kind of what they were accustomed to. And next year when I was going up there, Stan Stasiak was going to come in as their featured heel for that summer, and I was going to be with Freddie Sweetan. As fate would have it, maybe 3-4 weeks before the season was to open, Vince McMahon Sr. called Stan Stasiak and said that he had an opening for him to come to New York territory. Well, that was a chance of a lifetime for him, and the family that owned the promotion in the Maritimes, the last thing they wanted to do was say, hey, we were committed to you, and because they were certainly small in comparison to what a top spot in New York would be, and so they did the right thing, and they said, well, we're happy for you, and we'll figure out something. Well, let's figure out something. Where do you get a top guy in like 3 weeks' time? And Leo Burke was there. Of course, he was kind of worried and calling his brother up in the Maritimes every day, and oh God, what are we going to do? And I made a trip with Leo, and in the car I said, Leo, you're going to think I'm crazy, but let me just throw out an idea to you. I said, every year you've had this big burly heel fights the Beast, and I said, what if you changed the formula for 1 year and had a wrestling heel who wasn't huge in stature, who concentrated on his interviews, was arrogant, a loudmouth, just to change the formula for a year, and someone who wouldn't come in and fight the Beast with these classic battles, but someone who would use a foreign object or something to Beast, and now it's like, the Beast, he won't stand and fight me like a man. So then the challenge becomes Leo Burke to out-wrestle him, and just totally freshen up for me. And Leo's listening. So he calls his brother, and the first reaction was, I guess was kind of expected that, they weren't overwhelmed with the suggestion. And then I see Leo another day, after that, and he says, Rudy called me back, and he said the more he's thinking about it, the more he likes the idea, and I've told him what you're capable of doing, and he saw you last year that 1 week, and he said he's just worried that he wishes you just, were a little bit bigger. Do you think you could drink a six-pack every night and just, gorge yourself and put on a little weight? Ended up they made a commitment to go with me as the top heel, and so I went up there that summer and had a phenomenal summer. Probably made triple my income as to what I'd been making in Charlotte. I think and this is 1973, 74 in there, 73. I think the summer of 73, and and that's back when the money Canada, the United States par, and I averaged over $1,000 a week up there wrestling in the Canadian Maritime. And it was my break in the business. I was working on top in main events, doing interviews, and I springboarded from that success right from there to Amarillo and had a phenomenal run in Amarillo for over a year and a month, and got my first 2 trips to Japan, which was kind of one of the enticements of the function. If you come in here, we've got an agreement with Giant Baba, and we can get you a Japan tour.
JJ, what made it so much fun? I've heard a lot of people say up in Halifax they really enjoyed the experience. Was it the weather? Was it the people? Was it the food? Was it the way the promotion was run? What did you like looking back at it so much?
Well, for me, because it was my first break in the business, I think all the other things were not important to me. The fans up there were diehard fans, and because I wasn't a monster heel, people wanted to kick my butt. So there was the heat factor in the arenas, and they really looked out to take care of me that I didn't get hurt that summer. And I traveled even with Freddie Sweetan, even though he got another tag partner to take my place. And all of the old heels came back, like Killer Carl Krupp, the Mongolian Stomper, Eric Pomeroy. These were the guys after I wrestled. The first 3 weeks was do what you got to do to get over, which is always the biggest challenge, and they helped make sure that I had that opportunity. And then, of course, the rest of it was up to me. And then finally, after the third week in or so, I think one of the first weeks, Angelo Mosca came in to challenge the Beast. And then by the third week, I was hot enough to challenge the Beast for title, and just like we talked about, I used a chain out of my tights to bust him, and busted him open where he got stitches in his eye. Took the championship belt. Now I'm off and running. And of course, the return match, I wouldn't stay and fight him. Now I'm the champion, and he's got to beat me. And there was no way I was going to stay and fight him. And then went right from there to Leo Burke and had like a 3 or 4 week run with him, where it ended up after I would run from him, and it ended up in a cage match. And then because I had the wrestling ability, which again was a change for them. We wrestled for an hour in a cage, where he didn't beat me, but then, I didn't beat him either, and that's all I had to do was hold on to the belt. And, the fans up there they loved their local heroes, very supportive. The food up there was great. It was very laid back compared here, but it was a beautiful part of the world up there in the Canadian Maritime.
How about Freddie Sweetan? He was very famous in that territory. I never saw him wrestle, so.
He was a great performer, and he tragically died in a fire. He's an avid hunter, and he'd stayed up there. He came to Kansas City, and so I did get to see him on the road. In fact, he also came down to Charlotte the 1 year during after the season had closed, and it was a couple years later that Freddie was in his hunting cabin and having some beers, and he was a smoker and fell asleep in the cabin and still had a lit cigarette in his hand. And cabin caught on fire, and he burned up in the fire. But he was a great performer, and really a tragic loss.
Okay, JJ, we're going to wrap up right here. I wanted to cover some of your early career. Cauliflower Alley. I spoke with Carl the other day. You're in a speaking situation. Can you tell me a little about that? Or hosting?
Yeah, I joined. It's funny, over the years I heard Cauliflower Alley, and geez, you got to join, and I always, whether it was I had children late in life, whether it was my kids and I was still working, and just, never felt I had the time off to buy a plane ticket and spend a couple days off in Las Vegas. So there was always a convenient excuse why, geez, I wish I'd have known. I would have tried to make it, and I finally went to a reunion down in Mobile, Alabama, which is the Gulf Coast reunion. with it's not open to the fans, and they had done it for 10, 12 years, and Bill and Ann Bowman, and Ann has since passed away, were they were in the Carolinas when I first went in there, and we became friends and remained friends from that experience in Charlotte. And they settled down there, and Bill was on the board and one of the people that was in charge of that reunion each year. So there was a similar thing. You know, you got to come down. You know, even though you never wrestled in the Deep South like Alabama and in that territory, you know, there's guys that you worked with, you'll know. And so sure enough, I went down there and really had a great time. And one of the people in Cauliflower Alley said, look, you know, you enjoyed this so much, you don't know what you're missing with Cauliflower Alley. It's different in that it's so public, but you know, you will just have an unbelievable time. And so the following year, I went to the Cauliflower Alley reunion. It had an impact on me because Bob Orton Sr. was wrestling in the New York territory around that Buddy Rogers era when I was a kid in the late 50s. And I remember seeing the Big O, the original Big O, Bob Orton Sr., and knew that he was a main eventer throughout his career. And 20 years later, I went back to Amarillo for like the second time in like 77, 78, and who's working the territory along with Art Nelson, who I first met in Charlotte. But the Big O, Bob Orton, lived there with his family, and I think it was his last territory before he retired. So here I am around a guy 20 years later, working the same territory in the same dressing room, and he was one of the legends in the business. Well, he left there with Art Nelson, and I think both of them went to Las Vegas, and Orton settled there with his family and got a job, and Art Nelson went out there too in security or something. So now this is almost another 20 years later, around 2006, that I'm out there for my first Cauliflower Alley, and I'm in the hotel, which was in the Old Town that particular year. And I remember, you know, you're looking around to see who all is going to be there, and you know, sometimes you haven't seen a guy for a long time. I think I know him, but I don't know who it is. And I remember seeing a guy in a wheelchair across the lobby of the hotel, and I said, "Who is that?" They said, "That's Bob Orton." Oh my God! I went over, and his daughter was there, who I'd known in Charlotte 20 years earlier, because the whole family lived there. Her name was Rhonda, and so Rhonda was there, and he was in a wheelchair, and she was there, you know, kind of half taking care of him, and he had crutches, and I remember talking to him, and they told me, you know, why don't you know come on by tomorrow? You know, we got a pool, come on by. Of course, I was in Vegas for the first time for Cauliflower Alley, and as I look back, regret that I didn't say, sure, you know, I'll come over and spend some time with you tomorrow afternoon, and I didn't go because there was a lot to do at Cauliflower Alley, and it ended up that Cauliflower ended that year, and Bob Orton passed away like later. So it kind of really was not a wake-up call, but I thought, here is a thing where Bob Orton, one of the first guys I ever saw as a fan, 20 years later, at the end of his career, I'm sharing the same dressing room with him, and now 20 years later, here I see him, and he dies 2 years later. And like how many other guys did I miss seeing because I didn't take time and say, you know, it's important to go to Cauliflower Alley. So I became a lifetime member that year, and I've been back every year since, because it's you know, we lose more and more guys each year, and since I've been going back there, you know, I saw Playboy Gary Hart. He since passed away, and Gary was in Charlotte when I started, and I worked with Gary in Dallas, so I certainly value that time. Dewey Robertson, the missing link, got to be friends with him. He passed on after Cauliflower Alley, so it's one of those things that I really look forward to going back each year, and certainly as long as my health stays good, I want to continue to do so. And after, I think the first year, Nick Bockwinkel kind of did the hosting at the award banquet, and then the following year they had someone else, and it ended up the night kind of got away from them, and the event lasted like 4 hours, and then people were falling asleep. A lot of them got up and left before it was over, and so somebody said to me, you know, and I accepted for somebody that year or something. Somebody said, no, would you consider coming back and be the host for the bank next year? I said, yeah, it's not necessarily what I think I do best. I'm not, you know, a stand-up comedian or an entertainer. So that was 2 years ago, and apparently everybody was happy with the job that I did and asked me to come back and do it again this year, which I did. And it's kind of like, well, you know, hope we can count on you to come back next year. And I basically have said, you know, as long as I'm here and I'm alive and my health stays good, you know, I want to contribute in any way I can. And if that's how you feel that I can contribute, I will come back and host the awards banquet. And Terry Funk, who is a close friend of mine, called me about a month ago and said, I have an idea. He said, "Would you consider having me help host that thing? I think we make a great combination and play off each other." So I was flattered Terry had the idea, and just this last week when I was called by Carl Lauer regarding your interview, I told him that Terry Funk has had this suggestion, and I would embrace having him come back and do it with me next year, and I think it would hopefully help the thing draw, Terry being a former world champion.
Sure, absolutely.
I'm kind of an unofficial spokesman for Cauliflower Alley as well as for the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame that I'm a huge supporter of, even though they're much younger. They just had their 10th anniversary this last year with their induction, and I hosted that 2 years ago. They try to have somebody new every year, and I hosted that 2 years ago and actually was asked to be on the board of directors, which I am.
JJ, what's the best way to get your book?
It's sold by Scott Teal, who self-published. And if you go on my website, it's not available in bookstores. All orders go through Scott Teal's website, either credit card or I think does some mail order. And then what happens is I started the first year by offering to sign copies for anybody that bought it, and just as my way of saying thank you, I've continued that practice even till today. So what happens is Scott, who stores them, will send me a case or two of books. He takes the orders, most of which are credit card orders or PayPal orders, and then he sends me an email, like I got one today, where he gives me the name and the address, and if there's like a special request of whether they like it personalized or just a general signature, and I sign them, put them in an envelope, and mail them from here. So if you go on my website, jjdillon.com, and look at the top, you'll see Wrestlers Are Like Seagulls, and it says click here, which takes you then to Crowbar Press, the publisher, and not only my book, but he did Ole's book prior to mine, and he's since done Ivan Koloff, the assassin Jody Hamilton is about to release one on Gordon Soley as well.
JJ,
so you can order from there, and basically it gets mailed here.
JJ, it's been a real pleasure. I really appreciate you giving us all this time. The listeners, they're going to love this program. I've enjoyed it myself, and just wish you continue well.
Well, thank you very much, and I know we just kind of scratched on the surface, and one of the things I have a lot in common apparently with Nick Bockwinkel, because Nick Bockwinkel, when Vince McMahon was describing him, said if you ask Nick Bockwinkel what time it is, he first has to tell you how the watch is made before he gives you time, and I'm a little bit like that my answers tend to be lengthy and in-depth, and that's just the way my thought process is. So like I say, we've been on for quite a while, but we've really just scratched the surface of my career, and I would certainly be willing to do a follow-up interview so we can get further into my career, knowing that my interviews tend to be a little on the light side.
That's what I wanted to hear, JJ. A part 2.
Sounds good to me, Gary.
Hey, we'll talk soon, I promise, okay?
All right, my friend.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.